Chapter 42, Third Year, Fantastic Beasts. Friday the 7th of September, 1973. By the end of his first week of third year, Remus felt like he needed another 2 months just to recover, and there hadn't even been a full moon yet. He felt foolish for not considering that adding 3 extra subjects to his timetable would also increase his workload. But of course it did. And by the time Friday rolled around, he felt weighed down by the amount of homework to be completed over the weekend. "It's not fair," Peter whined. "This year was supposed to be fun, with Hogsmeade and everything." "We'll still go to Hogsmeade, Peter," James murmured over a complicated-looking star chart. "I'm with Pete," Sirius groaned, screwing up his dream diary for divination. "Let's sack this off and go and use the Quidditch pitch while it's still light." James looked up eagerly. "Yeah, go on then." All 3 of them stood. "No thanks," Remus said absent-mindedly. He was quite enjoying his transfiguration homework, an essay on bodily transformations. He was pretty good at basic modifications now, for covering up scars, and was able to answer the questions at length. "Don't fancy looking over my Muggle studies, do you, Moony?" Sirius asked, matily. Remus raised his eyebrows. "If I have time. James, Pete, want me to look at yours?" "Thanks, Remus," Peter grinned, tying up his shoelaces. "Nah," James refused. "Thought I might ask Evans for a bit of help on it later." "Losing battle, mate," Sirius counselled. "Dunno why you're so hung up on her." James just shrugged, not looking at all discouraged. Remus spent a satisfying hour or 2 by himself, completing the rest of his work for the week. He'd made a start on potions, but thought it could bear leaving for a little longer. Peter could give him a hand in exchange for the Muggle studies comprehension work. They had double potions on Monday now, first thing, but thankfully no longer with the Slytherins. In fact, the only class they shared with the Slytherins now was arithmancy, and that wasn't a practical subject, so there was much less space for open house warfare. Arithmancy was a real surprise to Remus. He'd expected to fall behind Sirius and James, at least at first, but it appeared that this subject was down to logic rather than magical ability, and Remus had found his first lesson to be shockingly straightforward. The homework, which he knew Sirius and James had not yet attempted, was to calculate their own heart and character numbers using the Agrippin method. This he actually found quite soothing, though he knew he would never admit it to anyone. Herbology plodded along in its usual pace. Remus couldn't pretend to be all that interested in it, but at least it wasn't difficult. Astronomy was not his strongest subject either, but luckily Peter was generally so thrilled to be the only one who knew something that he gave Remus most of the answers for nothing. Then there was his new favourite subject, care of magical creatures, on Wednesdays and Thursdays. He wasn't going to tell the others about that either. They already teased him for liking history so much, and for taking runes. All good-natured, of course. He made fun of them for doing divination, which, by the sounds of it, was pretty dire. He had read his copy of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them over the summer. It had been his favourite bedtime reading. The pictures and descriptions were so vivid they filled his dreams with the most spectacular images. There had been nothing in the set text, Remus was sure to check this, about werewolves. Fortunately, they weren't considered in the same league as magical creatures, and it looked as though they weren't going to be studying half-humans until next year in Defence Against the Dark Arts. "I hope we do unicorns," Marlene sighed, leaning against the wall as they queued outside the classroom for their first lesson. "Something really nice, like that." Mary raised an eyebrow. "I'd rather do dragons, something a bit exciting." "I'm just glad we don't have Kettleburn," Marlene replied. This made Remus pay attention. "Don't we? Who've we got then?" "Weren't you paying attention to Dumbledore at the feast?" Marlene looked at him disapprovingly. "Kettleburn's off in Romania, or Bulgaria, or something, doing some work for the ministry. I don't know how useful he is, though. He's not exactly in one piece." "So, who have we got?" Whoever it wasn't at the feast, Marlene shrugged, but my timetable says Professor L. Ferox. As she said this, the classroom door opened and the 5th years ahead of them filed out, chatting animatedly. The Gryffindor 3rd years went inside, and Remus took a desk by the window next to Marlene. When the teacher emerged from his office, both Mary and Marlene, and actually every other girl in the class, sat up a little straighter. He was a good deal younger than Kettleburn, who had been a bit grizzled even in his middle age. Remus would have guessed this teacher to be in his early 30s. He still had all of his limbs too, which was a definite plus. His hair was thick and sandy blonde, long enough to reach all the way down his back. He wasn't dressed in robes, like most teachers, but practical outdoorsy clothes and heavy brown leather boots. He had a slightly weather-beaten face, which served to give his strong features a kind of rugged appeal. His eyes were bright blue and gleamed as he smiled warmly at the class. "Good afternoon," he boomed, in a gruff Liverpudlian accent. He clapped his large calloused hands together. "Welcome to your first year of Care of Magical Creatures. I'm Professor Ferox. You've all got the Newt Scamander text, I hope?" The class immediately pulled out their copies of Fantastic Beasts, along with parchment and quills, then looked up at him attentively. Professor Ferox continued to beam at them all. "Excellent," he continued. "A cracking read, as I'm sure some of you have already discovered. It gives you a nice, comprehensive guide to identifying and encountering most of the well-known magical creatures. But what it can't give you, and what you'll need to excel in this class, is quick thinking, cool-headedness, and nerves of steel." Some of the girls tittered at this, and Remus felt a flutter of excitement. "See, James," he thought ruefully, "it's not a girly subject." He wasn't sure about the specifics, though. He had enough nerve, maybe, had to, after the summer he'd had, but cool-headedness was hardly one of his defining traits. "Now," Ferox clapped his hands together, as if eager to begin. He bent under his desk. "Look what I've got for you." When he rubbed his palms, the rough skin made a soft shh sound. He obviously didn't spend a lot of time inside, Remus thought to himself. Professor Ferox was clearly a man of action. The teacher was now lifting a large wicker basket, setting it gently down on the desk. He opened it, and a large furry creature stalked out. It was the biggest cat Remus had ever seen, with bushy silver fur patterned with dark spots, high pointed ears, and a strange brush tail like a lion. It mewed, rather grumpily, then hopped up to sit on top of the basket so that it was almost eye level with Ferox. It glared imperiously down at the class, flicking its tail back and forth. Professor Ferox stroked a long finger down the animal's back, which it appeared to tolerate, blinking slowly. "Can anyone tell me what sort of creature Achilles here is?" "It's a cat," Mary said bluntly, without raising her hand. Ferox laughed cheerfully. "A common mistake, Miss MacDonald, Mary MacDonald. Miss MacDonald. No, Achilles is not a cat, though they are often interbred." "Ooh," a Ravenclaw boy at the back of the room raised his hand. "Yes, Mr. Stanbrooks, sir. Is it an easel, sir?" 5 points to Ravenclaw, Ferox nodded enthusiastically. "Achilles is an easel." Remus sighed inwardly. He knew that. He ought to have known it, anyway. He could remember reading about the tale. Mentally, he struck quick thinking off the list of Ferox's requirements, hoping to show the professor that he was at least eager to earn. Remus began to take notes as Ferox spoke, still stroking Achilles absent-mindedly. "You can always identify an easel by its cat-like appearance, high level of intelligence, speckled fur, and plumed tail," the teacher said, indicating these features lovingly. "They are classified XXX by the Ministry of Magic. Can anyone tell me what that means?" Remus's hand shot up this time, but so did Marlene's. Ferox picked her, asking her name as he did so. "Marlene McKinnon," she smiled up at him. "Sir, XXX classified creatures are not recommended for domestication, but should not prove difficult for a qualified wizard to handle. Excellent! 5 points to Gryffindor. Ferox tipped his head. Remus fumed silently. She'd read that straight from the book. Ferox carried on. We will be focusing on XXX classified creatures for the rest of the year. Now, while it's true that Kneazles are not recommended as pets, this is not because they are dangerous. In fact, anyone who tells you they're dangerous has likely found themselves on the wrong side of one, and should not be trusted. Can anyone tell me why? Remus's hand flew up again. It was all coming back to him now. But Ferox picked another Ravenclaw this time. Because they can detect suspicious people. Davy Kirk piped up, earning another 5 points for Ravenclaw. Absolutely, the professor smiled. Kneazles are excellent judges of characters, and will react fiercely to anyone untrustworthy. As such, the Ministry requires Kneazle owners to hold the proper license and have undergone certain proficiency tests. But as you can see, he stroked Achilles once more. The silver cat had barely moved a muscle, except to survey the class. They do make wonderful pets, as long as they are shown proper respect and care. Is he yours then, Professor? Mary asked, batting her eyelashes flirtatiously. He's lovely. He is indeed, Ferox replied. If you're all careful and don't crowd him, Achilles will probably let you stroke him. Line up, class. There was a general murmuring and scraping of chairs as everyone got to their feet and formed a queue. Remus made sure he was at the very back, so that maybe the lesson would end before he got to the front. Achilles was sure to hate him. Werewolves were the very definition of untrustworthy. Approach him slowly and don't avoid eye contact. If he tries to go for you, he'll use his claws, so keep alert. There we go. He'll let you stroke him now. Nice and gentle. As the queue shortened, the professor continued talking, giving them encouragement and interesting facts, interwoven with his own anecdotes. Remus didn't know what Ferox had done before becoming a teacher, but he'd certainly had some adventures. Travelled everywhere, it sounded like. Finally, Remus was at the front of the queue. He felt frozen to the spot, looking at the yellow-eyed animal nervously. Come on then. What's your name? Professor Ferox beckoned him forward. Remus didn't move. Remus Lupin. I'm not, cats don't tend to like me, he mumbled. Achilles is not a cat, the teacher said, still smiling. Come on, Lupin. Up you come. Remus sighed heavily and approached. He didn't want someone as cool as Ferox to think he was a wuss. Achilles watched him walk forward. It did look very intelligent. There was something in the eyes. Even though it had a very ugly snubbed nose, he reached his hand out, allowing the Kneazle to sniff at him. Its claws weren't out, but Remus was willing to bet that they were very long and very sharp. He'd been scratched by cats before, and they had never really liked him. Very good, Professor Ferox was saying. Now, a bit closer, and give him a stroke. Go on. Swallowing hard, Remus obeyed, ready to jump back if he had to. But Achilles did not seem to mind that he was a werewolf. Instead, he actually began to purr as Remus rubbed him tentatively behind the ear, closing its eyes and looking completely docile. There we are, Professor Ferox cheered, delighted. Excellent judges of character, Kneazles. Now, we haven't long left, so if you'll all just make note of the homework. Remus stroked Achilles for a little bit longer. The creature seemed to be enjoying it so much that he felt bad for stopping. That was good, wasn't it? Marlene chatted as they left their first lesson. I hope he always brings things in for us to look at. Not going to be very practical when we get to the 5X creatures, Remus said. Maybe he'll bring Achilles in again, though, Marlene replied hopefully. Who cares about his cat? Mary nudged her. He's bloody gorgeous. Yeah, Marlene giggled. I wonder if he's single. Remus sighed and began to lag behind the girls. They were a nightmare when they got onto the topic of boys, and it was best to stay out of their way before they started waxing lyrical and about James and Sirius. He began to daydream as they meandered in the direction of the Great Hall for lunch. It had been a better lesson than he'd expected, and even though Ferox hadn't given him any house points, he had essentially said that Remus had a trustworthy character. No one had ever said anything like that before, and it made him feel unusually pleased with himself. A peaceful feeling that carried on throughout lunch, into their potions lesson later that day, and was still going strong that night as he drifted off to sleep. He dreamt of lions. Chapter 43. Third year. The Hogwarts Black Market. Wednesday, the 12th of September, 1973. Ugh! Go to bed, Lupin! Sirius threw a shoe at him from his bed. Sorry, Remus cringed guiltily as he quickly pulled the curtains shut, throwing the room back into darkness. It was 5 a.m. and he was awake, more awake than he'd ever felt in his life. He crept downstairs, not wanting to disturb anyone else, clutching a shoebox under one arm. With a brand new book to read, Remus set up camp in the most comfortable armchair in the deserted common room. He often came down early, on mornings like this, when his body simply refused to sleep and he had so much energy he thought he could run laps around the castle without breaking a sweat. Remus had never actually tried this. If anything, he tried to push the strange urge away, lock it up, and focus on his mind instead. Still, he struggled to concentrate on his book. He thought about going for a walk, but they weren't really allowed out of bounds until breakfast began at 6. Ugh! He had to try and not think about breakfast, or his stomach would start growling. Never mind that he'd had 3 helpings of mashed potatoes with his beef stew last night. Even Peter had looked impressed. Even if it was time for breakfast, he'd said he would be in the common room for an hour from 6:30 onwards. This was the ideal time, he had decided. No one expected you to be up to anything nefarious that early in the morning, and the other marauders typically didn't get up until 7:30, even on weekdays. Sirius would stay in bed longer if he could possibly. James sometimes got up for an early morning broom practice, but not usually until after 7. Remus looked down at the shoebox in his lap. He could cast a quick misdirection charm if James came down sooner than expected. That wouldn't be too difficult. Mind you, the state his magic was in at the moment, he'd better not risk doing it while the box was in his lap, or he ran the risk of vanishing something much more vital. He'd already been to Madame Pomfrey once this term, attempting to grow his hair out in Transfiguration. He'd needed Peter and James to help him carry his rapidly growing locks to the hospital wing. Sirius had been laughing too hard to be of any use at all. Remus experimented levitating his book, but it shot up to the ceiling, smacking it hard before plummeting towards the floor. He sighed. He could do nothing but sit and wait, it seemed. He wished he could have the record player on. Sirius had left it in the common room, along with his newest albums from Andromeda, Aladdin Sane, and Led Zeppelin 4. Sirius had been listening to Black Dog on repeat for weeks now. Remus opened the shoebox and took a quick inventory, though it was unnecessary. This would be his first sale, if anyone came. He'd spoken to a few 5th years he'd seen smoking the year before, and got them interested. They seemed to be under some impression that Muggle fags were somehow more potent, or maybe just more exotic than the wizarding ones. He did nothing to discourage the idea, and told them to spread the word. Sirius had once obtained an exhaustive list of all the Hogwarts school rules, suggesting that they attempt to break every one before they reach 7th year. Remus read through it, and had found nothing that mentioned tobacco trafficking. Not if you took the language very literally, anyway. Besides, it wasn't going to be a regular thing. He only had the stuff he'd brought with him. He had planned to give it all a bit more thought, to wait until after the full moon, but then he found out that their first Hogsmeade weekend was coming up on the 15th, and he'd decided he needed to get a move on. Sirius and James had already planned the trip out in full, without consulting Peter or Remus, who were just happy to trail after them as usual. Honeydukes, obviously, then Zonkos to stock up on dung bombs, then the Shrieking Shack, because James's dad didn't believe it was haunted, which meant James didn't either, and Sirius wanted to prove them both wrong. Then they were very keen to have Remus try something called butterbeer. Remus had his own plans. He was going to tell them that a long-lost aunt had died and left him a very small amount of money. This would hopefully be enough of an explanation to satisfy James, who was certain to ask where Remus had acquired his newfound wealth. Remus felt sure that petty crime, even in the Muggle world, was not something James took lightly. Sirius might shrug it off, having little regard for rules in any setting, but he would probably also try to lend Remus some of his own money, which defeated the whole point. "Lupin, that you?" A 6-year had come downstairs from the boys' dormitories, still looking bleary-eyed, clutching a Newt textbook. "Yeah." Remus sat up straighter in the armchair, roused from his daydream. "Great, did you say 5 sickles for a pack of 20? "That's right." Remus opened his box, quickly, gesturing the 6-year come over. They made the swap, and the 6-years scurried out of the portrait hole, probably off for a morning fag before the library. The little silver coins rattled heavy in Remus's hand, and he grinned to himself. He was selling everything for twice the market rate, but if people were willing to pay... He made 2 more sales to some 5th years, and to a 7th-year girl who brought a packet of loose tobacco and asked if he had anything more fun for sale. He was a bit confused by what she meant, and just repeated that he only had pre-rolled and loose. She shrugged. "I'll ask Martha Edhurst in Hufflepuff. She's usually got the good stuff." Remus nodded, still not really sure what she meant. Either way, it appeared that he was not the only student in school with an entrepreneurial mind. By 7:15, Remus's shoebox was half empty and its pockets jangling. Deeply satisfied, he packed everything away as the common room filled up with students beginning their days. "Watcha, Remu?" James came bounding down the stairs, broom in hand, just as Remus was heading up. "You're up early?" "Yeah, couldn't sleep," Remus replied evasively. Fortunately, James was eager to get out onto the Quidditch pitch and didn't pay any attention to the shoebox or the strange clinking sound Remus's robes were making. "See you for lunch?" he called, already halfway across the room. "Yep," Remus nodded, hurrying on his way back upstairs. In the dorm room, Peter was in the shower and Sirius was still asleep, covers thrown over his head. The only part of him visible was his black hair spilling out onto the white pillow. Remus crept silently over to his own bed and deposited his money and his goods before collecting together his books for the day. James had obviously yanked back the curtains before leaving, and, Remus thought with some annoyance, had not received the same rebuke from Sirius that he had. There was enough light for him to neatly sort through his homework and carefully stow in his bag. He'd done all the work that was due for the next few days, unsure how much time Madame Pomfrey would make him stay off lessons. He hoped not too long. He'd asked James to make a note of the homework in their shared classes, but he'd be missing care of magical creatures and runes too. He couldn't very well ask any of the girls to get the right notes for him, not without them asking where he'd be. His stomach rumbled again. He wondered if James was having breakfast right now. Potter often ate food on the go, always rushing to one place or another. The bathroom door creaked open, and Peter peered around the door, hair still wet and cheeks pink from the shower. He waved and mouthed, "Morning, Moony." Remus raised a hand in response. Peter looked at Sirius anxiously, who was still just a lump in the duvet, before tiptoeing carefully over to his own bed to fetch his tie. Remus watched with some amusement as Peter attempted to gather his things without making so much as a sound. There was a fine line, Remus thought, between showing respect for your dorm mate's sleeping habits and just being a complete and utter wuss. It was mean of him, but Remus was feeling particularly wicked that morning. Blame it on the moon. He pulled his wand slowly from his pocket and waved it very lightly, whispering under his breath. In an instant, Peter's book bag slid off the end of his bed, landing with a heavy thud, which reverberated off the bedroom's stone walls, rattling the window panes. Wide-eyed, Peter froze, going pale. He shot a look at Sirius, who was stirring, and practically fled from the room, leaving his tie behind. Remus wheezed with laughter, having to sit down on his own bed, clutching his stomach. When he opened his eyes, still catching his breath, Sirius was wide awake, still lying in bed, propped up on one elbow, staring at Remus as if he was mad. "You did that on purpose, didn't you?" Remus shrugged and nodded, standing up again and returning to his pile of homework. Sirius threw a pillow at him. "Knob." "What?" Pete looked like such a prat tiptoeing around you. Couldn't help myself. "Not very gallant of you, picking on the weak, Mooney." Sirius yawned and stretched. "He's fine." Remus waved a dismissive hand. "I'll take him his tie. Anyway, someone had to get you up. Come on, it's breakfast." Sirius yawned again. "Bring me something." "No." "James would." Sirius whined. "James isn't here." "Peter would." "As we've established," Remus said, hoisting his book bag up on his shoulder. "Peter's a coward." Sirius groaned and leaned back. "Fine, I'll get up. Wait for me." "I'm hungry," Remus complained. "I won't take long. Just treat it as penance for waking me up." "You threw a shoe at me this morning." "Did I hit you?" "No." "Well then." Sirius got out of bed, grabbing his uniform. "Serves you right anyway, getting up at stupid o'clock." "Couldn't sleep," Remus said. "I think it's the moon." Sirius stopped outside the bathroom door. He looked at Remus with something a bit like pity, if Sirius Black even had it in him to feel sorry for anyone else but himself. Remus regretted saying anything. He didn't want pity. He rarely brought up the full moon for exactly that reason. "Sorry, Lupin," Sirius said. Do you worry about it?" "No, it's not like that," Remus said hurriedly. "I just get restless, hungry too. So hurry up." He laughed lightly to show that everything was fine. Sirius smirked, disappearing into the bathroom. "You ought to be grateful, Mooney," he called from inside, turning on the shower. "Not many Gryffindors would be able to lie in when they know they're sharing a room with a restless werewolf." "Wanker," Remus called back. Thursday the 13th of September, 1973. He woke up upstairs, which was unusual. There were mice in the house. He knew that because he often saw them before he transformed. Perhaps once he turned, he chased them, but he didn't think he ever caught any. 3 of his fingers were broken, but at least his shoulders hadn't dislocated. That had already happened twice this year. Before moving, Remus made a series of mental checks from top to toe. What hurt? How much did it hurt? Was he numb anywhere? Did all his limbs move when he wanted them to? No, it seemed all right. A few scratches, none too deep. He'd got off easily. Perhaps the wolf was happy to be back at Hogwarts. He got up from the floor and limped over to the window. Sometimes his knees got a bit out of joint, but this morning they were only sore. He tried to squint through the gaps in the boards, but it was no good. The house was sealed up tight. "Remus, dear?" Madame Pomfrey's voice drifted up the stairs. "Come in," he croaked back, hoarsely. His clothes were downstairs, so he ripped an old blanket from the bed with his good hand and wrapped it around himself. It smelled of mildew and dead things. "What have I told you, boys? He can't have visitors on the first day." Madame Pomfrey's scolding interrupted his dreams. Remus blinked, yawning. The hospital was dimly lit, curtains drawn. It must be evening already. His stomach grumbled. He wondered if he'd eaten anything yet, or if the nurse had let him sleep instead. He lost so much time after transforming. Like his bones, nothing seemed to fit together quite right. "It's been almost a day," Peter's voice now. "We brought him chocolate." "Well, that's very nice of you, dear." Madame Pomfrey's voice softened a little. She wasn't a natural disciplinarian. "But Mr. Lupin is I'd love some chocolate," he called out, hoping they could hear him. His throat felt raw. The curtain whipped back to reveal Peter, James, and Sirius standing there, looking triumphant. "Hiya, Moony," James and Sirius chorused, plonking themselves down at the end of the bed, either side of his ankles. "Here you go." Peter dropped 3 chocolate frogs in his lap. "Cheers." "Well, if you're up anyway," Madame Pomfrey sighed. "I'll go and fetch you some proper food. 1/2 an hour, boys. That's all." "Here's your homework, you big weirdo." James pulled some parchment from his bag, handing it over. "Thanks, James. You're a lifesaver." Remus put it on his bedside table for later. "And here's the rest of it." Sirius handed him some more. "I had to wait outside your Care of Magical Creatures class for half of lunch, so you'd better get top marks on that." "You did?" Remus stared at Sirius, amazed. Sirius nodded, imperiously. "I did. Got to say too, bit jealous of you. Looks like a really interesting subject. Wish I wasn't stuck doing divination." "But what about me?" James said, gasping dramatically. "I see you plenty," Sirius retorted, giving him a shove. "Such a fickle heart," James sighed, making large eyes at Sirius, so that Peter began to giggle uncontrollably. Sirius shoved James again, and James leapt at him, pulling him into a headlock and tussling Sirius's hair. "Oi, Moony," Peter said suddenly. "Arabella Fenchurch gave me this for you." He set down a handful of sickles. "She said you knew what it was for." Yeah, thanks, Peter." Remus hurriedly tried to gather up the coins and hide them under his pillow. I had this chocolate frog card she really wanted. Aglaonike of Talassi." "Oh, I wanted that one." Peter looked hurt. Remus shrugged. "Sorry, mate. Money talks." Chapter 44, 3rd year, Hogsmeade. Saturday the 15th of September, 1972. "Pack your cloak, James." "Why?" "You never know, do you?" "Fine, but I doubt we'll want it." "Don't forget you owe me a galleon on that bet we had." "I haven't," James returned patiently. "Just relax for a minute, will you?" "Never." Sirius grinned back. "Do you realise this is the most excitement I've had in months? I wasn't even allowed to go to Diagon Alley this summer." "You had more going on than I did," James replied resentfully. "You at least had all that betrothal drama. My family's so boring." "Shut up, Potter. Your family's amazing and you know it. I definitely had the worst summer." "I had a great time in France," Peter piped up, but no one paid him much attention. "What about you, Moony?" James asked as they made their way down the stairs into the common room. A gang of excited third years were waiting, ready for their first trip to the village. They were watched over with a sort of fond nostalgia by the older students. "What about me?" Remus asked, pushing away flashbacks of the summer, the memory of wriggling through a tiny bathroom window and landing hard on his knees on the tile below. "How was your summer? You haven't told us anything." "Nothing to tell," Remus said. "More boring than both of yours. No magic. I just read." "Well, you're all coming to mine for Christmas," James said cheerfully. They began to file out of the common room and head towards the front entrance. "Same as last year, yeah? Moon's on the 10th of December, so we don't even have to worry about that." Remus gaped. "How do you know when it is?" He hadn't even looked that far ahead yet. "Told you, we were bored over the summer." Sirius elbowed him. "We looked it up for the next few years." "But why?" Remus was torn between feeling very touched and somewhat violated. It wasn't for them to worry about. It was his own private problem, and always had been. "It's like Quidditch," James said. Whenever anything was important to him, he compared it to Quidditch. "You've got to know your team's weaknesses in order to work on their strengths." "If you say so." Remus replied glumly, not wanting to talk about it much more. He had hoped that once they knew about his condition, there would be no war researching it behind his back, that they would just all get on with things in the way he preferred, which was to ignore the problem completely. The trouble was, nothing was private when it came to James and Sirius. Your whole life was up for grabs. Remus still wasn't used to this. As hard as he tried to keep up, there were just some things he would never want to share. It was all very well if you were James, and had open parents who talked to you and listened to you in return. Or Sirius, who was so outgoing and almost entirely shameless. "Look who it is!" Sirius nudged James, pointing at the dark figure waiting in the archway entrance. Lily pushed past the marauders and went to meet him. Snape. "Why are they even friends?" James ran his hands through his hair distractedly. "They grew up in the same town," Remus said as they carried on, watching the couple ahead, talking animatedly, one red head, one black. "How'd you know?" James rounded on him, looking affronted. "She told me." "You fancy her then?" James asked, clearly struggling to know how to react. Remus rolled his eyes. "No, we just chat," he said firmly. "And if you fancy her, then you might want to try it." He'd noticed this sort of talk creeping into their conversations lately. Sometimes he had to double-check he was talking to the marauders and not Marlene and Mary. He fancies her, she fancies so-and-so, and on and on. To make matters worse, Avni Chaudhry, a Gryffindor third year, was now going out with Ravenclaw fourth year Matthew Studd, and no one had talked about anything else for days. Everyone seemed to have an opinion on it. It was mind-numbingly boring stuff to Remus, for whom, aside from a few exceptions, girls were still generally incomprehensible. "She likes you, though," James said. "You did all your revision together last term." "Only because you lot couldn't be asked," Remus replied defensively. They were approaching the town now. A cluster of pretty stone buildings sat just below them. "It's not like we were alone. Mary and Marlene were there too." "We all need to take notes from Moony," Sirius teased. "Birds follow him everywhere. How'd you do it, Lupin? Those big brown eyes of yours." James and Peter snickered, but Remus ignored him, walking a little bit ahead, hands in pockets, still limping slightly from his last transformation. That was an utterly ridiculous suggestion, especially when it was obvious to anyone with eyes that Sirius was the best-looking boy in the year. It was clearer than ever, now that they were all getting taller, growing from childhood into adolescence. James had a certain amount of swagger that came with wealth and skill on the Quidditch pitch. But Sirius was always going to be in another league entirely. Remus hadn't decided whether to be jealous about it or not, and tried not to think about it too much. When they finally reached Hogsmeade, Remus could not be more relieved. The village looked like the sort of place Remus had previously thought only existed in children's books. The cobbled streets gleamed in the yellow mid-September sunshine, and the higgledy-piggledy rows of black-beamed Tudor cottages might as well have been made out of gingerbread and spun sugar. "Honeydukes?" James said. "Honeydukes," the others responded in unison. Remus had never entered the sweet shop through the front door before, nor had he ever been on the shop floor. It was packed to the rafters with boxes, jars, and bags of every kind of confection imaginable. Great trees of brightly coloured lollipops as large as pinwheels, slabs of chocolate the size of paving stones, piles and piles of glittering sugar mice. The shop was also packed with Hogwarts students, and the marauders had to push and squeeze to even get close to the goods. They filled their baskets with enough sweets to last them until Christmas at least, before queuing for the till, manned by a very harassed-looking wizard with white hair. Remus realised that this was probably Mr. Honeyduke, and wondered whether the shopkeeper knew that there was a secret tunnel in his cellar. After that, their next shop was Zonko's, the joke shop, which was just as busy as Honeyduke's, and one of the noisiest places Remus had ever been. Every few seconds something seemed to explode, pop, or start whistling somewhere in the shop, accompanied by the delighted laughter or horrified shrieks of students. James and Sirius were clearly old hands at practical joke shopping, and made an efficient sweep of the premises, weighing up the benefits and downsides of each contraption like a pair of bankers at the stock exchange. Half an hour later, they were finally leaving, weighed down with bags full of dung bombs, trick ones, exploding inkwells, hiccup sweets, and bars of frog spawn soap. Remus thought they had perhaps been a little short-sighted doing all their shopping first, because next James and Sirius wanted to visit the Shrieking Shack, which meant leaving the main high street and facing an uphill climb, goods in tow. So, what is this place again? Remus huffed as he struggled up the hill, his knee and hip still bothering him. Haunted house, James replied, taking two of Remus's heaviest shopping bags from him without a word. Most haunted place in Britain, Daz says. It's not haunted, Sirius called from up ahead. You Potters are just superstitious. I heard that the ghosts here were really nasty, Peter said anxiously, struggling almost as much as Remus with the steep incline. Worse than Peeves. Are they poltergeists, then? Remus asked, curious. He'd been planning on doing some reading about spirituous apparitions when he got the chance, after learning that he'd been his father's main area of study. Think so, James said. The locals say they hear screaming coming from the house some nights. Only for a few years, though, Sirius countered. Poltergeists don't just move in at a moment's notice. There would have to have been decades and decades of disturbance and negative energy building up to, oh my God. Lupin stopped still and almost dropped the bags he was still holding. He had looked up at the house for the first time, and a cold chill struck the pit of his stomach. What's up, Moony? Want me to take your bags? James was asking. Remus shook his head, speechless. He couldn't tear his eyes away. He'd never seen it from the outside before. They'd always come through the tunnel. But he knew the shade of wood. He knew what the boarded windows looked like. Bloody hell, if it is haunted, then I think Moony's been possessed, Sirius said, sounding like he was only half joking. Oi, Lupin, you're being weird. Stop it. That's... Remus struggled to find the words. He closed his eyes and tried to take a few breaths. That's the house, where they put me. James seemed to understand at once and put a hand on Remus's shoulder in a brotherly sort of way. Okay, come on, it's time to go, he said. No one said anything as they began to trudge back downhill towards the town. Remus looked at the ground ahead the whole time, concentrating on putting one foot in front of the other and getting as far away from the shack as he could. The Shrieking Shack. Shrieking. He felt sick. James steered them in the direction of a quaint-looking pub. Inside, there were lots of tables and comfortable chairs, not a far cry from the Gryffindor common room. They found seats in a quiet corner, and Remus sat gratefully, his joints very sore now. James went to the bar, and Sirius and Peter sat either side of Remus. So, on the full moon, that's where you go? Peter asked. Remus nodded, fiddling with a damp beer mat on the table. It's not haunted then? Peter continued. Nope, just me. So wait, the shrieking is me. But why? Shut up, Pettigrew, Sirius snarled suddenly. Remus looked at him, taken aback. James returned with 4 bottles of amber liquid and set them down, taking his own seat. Butterbeer, he said brightly, pushing one towards Remus. Try it, Moony. You'll love it. Remus raised the glass to his lips. He was still feeling a bit queasy, and the concoction in the bottle smelled very syrupy, but he found that sweet things usually helped if he had shock. He took a sip and felt instantly warmed by the delicious liquid. He smiled at James, hoping they wouldn't ask any more questions. They didn't. Instead, they spent a very pleasant afternoon drinking butterbeer and planning on how best to utilise their new practical joke arsenal. Peter had the unusually brilliant idea of casting a remote timer spell on the dung bombs so that they could be triggered at any time from anywhere inside the castle. excellent diversionary tactic, James explained, excited. Think of what we could get away with if Filch was chasing dung bombs on the opposite side of the building. Give us more time to work on the map a bit more too, Remus added. You're not seeing the big picture. Sirius folded his arms, leaning back in his chair. We could set them all to go off at the same time. Imagine, we've probably got enough here to hide one in every classroom. Total chaos. Sirius looked so enraptured when he said this that the other three were completely taken in, nodding furiously. Oh, let's not sit here, Lily. It doesn't look very clean. A nasty, bitter voice interrupted them. They allow in all sorts, clearly. Sirius snapped forward on his chair, glaring at Snape, who was hovering next to the nearby table. Don't be silly, Sev. It's fine. Lily shook her head, pulling out a seat. All right, Evans? James waved at her compulsively, getting that stupid look on his face. Leave us alone, will you, Potter? Lily tossed her hair. Hi, Remus. Hi. He waved at her, grinning. He couldn't help enjoying the way she treated the marauders. She was the only one who didn't fawn over all of them. Ugh, Sirius said, holding his nose, looking at Snape. What is that smell? Potter, did you trail something in here on your shoe? James sniggered. Smells more like a dung bomb's gone off. Disgusting, Sirius smirked. Maybe we should open a window. Snape had gone white with rage. Lily put a hand on his arm. Just ignore them, Sev. They're idiots. But Severus would not let Sirius have the last word. How's the family, Black? He asked, his voice wielding, insidious. Sirius's mouth formed a hard line. Snape continued. Regulus was telling everyone you had quite an exciting summer. So exciting, in fact, that you are no longer welcome back. I don't know what you're talking about, Snivellus, Sirius spat. Remus knew that it was too late now. Sirius had engaged, and there was no going back. Don't I? Snape raised an eyebrow, clearly thrilled at the reaction he had elicited. Had any post from Mummy this year, Black? Heard anything at all from any of your relatives? Sirius had a very odd look on his face. Remus had the impression that he was realizing something for the first time and trying not to let Severus see it. James looked concerned, no longer laughing. Ignore him, mate, he said quietly. He's a prick. Ignore him. I'm right, then. Severus's thin lips curled into a nasty smile. No wonder you follow Potter around like a lovesick girl when your own family don't want anything to do with you. When you've been disowned like that. I suppose all that's left is to associate with the dregs of society. He cast his black eyes over Peter and Remus. Sirius stood up, knocking his chair back. His wand was in his hand. He must have reached for it while Snape was talking. Remus stood too, his aching bones forgotten as he clenched his fist, ready to beat Severus senseless, if Sirius gave the word. Sirius, don't! James went to snatch his wand away. They weren't allowed to perform magic in Hogsmeade. Come on, Severus, let's go. Lily had stood up too, and was tugging her friend's sleeve. She looked furious with him, which was a small comfort to Remus. No, Sirius said, his voice unnervingly steady and authoritative. We're leaving. Come on, lads. I can't take this stench much longer. They did as ordered, even James, who only threw one longing look back at Lily on their way out. That was really mature, Potter said, scratching his head as they stepped out of the pub into the warm evening light. Sirius snorted, starting off back towards Hogwarts. It's not over, he said fiercely, the others jogging to catch up with his purposeful strides. I'll show him. I'll bloody destroy him. The marauders were at war. End of chapter 44.